My name is Elliot Mercer, and by all appearances, I had what they call a respectable upbringing. Middle-class family. Lawn trimmed every Saturday. Flag hung out every national holiday. Our mailbox had one of those brass nameplates bolted onto the side. The Mercers. 2 stories. For bedrooms, 0 affection. Dad was a teacher. Not just any teacher. He was the teacher at Willow Ridge High. Charles Mercer, the legend. The kind of man who still wore a tie to pick up dry cleaning. Who used phrases like intellectual rigor and moral fiber in casual conversations. He taught history and civics, but more than that, he taught discipline. That was his mantra, his creed, his excuse. Every student at Willow Ridge knew his name. Every parent praised his lectures. The school board kept renewing his tenure without a second glance. But if you peeled back the curtain, if you lived in the Mercer house, you saw the cracks in the marble. Mom was a ghost in our home. She floated through rooms, smiled when she needed to, nodded when asked to, but mostly disappeared into the background. She didn't speak up when Dad's voice raised. She didn't interfere when his hands got involved. She just closed the door and turned up the TV. And me? I was the honor roll puppet. On paper, I was the kind of son any parent would brag about. Perfect attendance. Top 5% of my class. Participated in student government. Even played trombone in the marching band because Dad said, rounded applications open Ivy League doors. But all of it, every medal, every A+, every flawless report card, was shackled to fear. The rules were simple. Anything less than a 93 was failure. Failure meant consequences. Consequences meant the belt. Not a metaphor. An actual black leather belt that hung on the back of the pantry door, like a shrine. I called it the enforcer in my head. It wasn't used often, because it didn't need to be. The threat of it kept me sharp. That, and the sound it made when Dad unbuckled it in silence. Once, in 9th grade, I got a 91 in chemistry. 2 points. 2 stupid points. I didn't sleep the night I brought that paper home. I tried to fix it, but the ink was red and impossible to erase. He didn't yell that night. Just folded the test, placed it on the table like it was evidence, and walked to the pantry. I took my shirt off before he asked. It was always worse when I resisted. He said resistance was a symptom of defiance. He struck twice. Deliberate. Mechanical. Not out of rage, worse. It was calculated. He timed each lash between questions. Why'd you get a 91? I sobbed out something about ions and pressure. Do you understand how shameful this is? Another strike. If my own son can't meet my standards, what kind of man am I raising? A broken one, I wanted to say. But I didn't. Because broken things don't speak. He had a way of breaking you in subtle increments. Not just physically, mentally, spiritually, academically. Every inch of self-worth was measured against his expectations. If you cried too much, you were weak. If you didn't cry at all, you were cold. If you brought him straight A's, he'd say, good. That's what's expected. If you asked for praise, he'd say, you want a trophy for doing your job? It wasn't discipline. It was control dressed in corduroy pants and tenure. He used to sit in his armchair, grading papers with a red pen like it was a scalpel. Sometimes I'd watch him scratch through entire paragraphs with a flick of his wrist, muttering things like, this one'll work for minimum wage, or another snowflake who thinks passion equals intelligence. He loved failing students. Said it weeded out the mediocrity. He kept a drawer full of plagiarized essays, copies of students who tried to cheat. He'd gloat about catching them, then read their personal notes out loud at dinner, mocking the desperation. I learned early that failure in our home wasn't just punished, it was dissected. But here's the kicker. He didn't even believe the bullshit he preached. Once, when I was 14, I walked into his office without knocking, a cardinal sin, and caught him adjusting grades. It was subtle, methodical. He had a list of names on a post-it note, next to a spreadsheet on his computer. I remember the names. Kids of board members, sons of donors, daughters of PTA presidents. He raised their grades manually. A B became an A. A borderline fail became a high C. I froze, the door half open, heart pounding. He didn't notice me at first. He was too focused, too smug. When he finally saw me, he didn't panic, didn't explain, just looked at me and said, there are rules, and then there are exceptions. That was the first time the image cracked. The first time the mighty Charles Mercer, the paragon of truth and education, revealed his rot. I went back to my room that night, lay in bed, and stared at the ceiling. I didn't cry. I didn't plot. I just understood. Understood that the rules didn't apply to him. Understood that he didn't actually care about learning, just control, appearances, legacy. Understood that he was a fraud. That seed sat inside me for years. It didn't bloom right away, but it took root. You know how sometimes people say, one day you'll laugh about this. I never did. I didn't laugh. I didn't forget. I waited. I waited until I could fight on equal terms. Until I could play the game by his rules, but better, stronger, smarter, colder. My name is Elliot Mercer. And this story isn't about trauma. It's about karma. And I've got a perfect score in payback. They say the first betrayal you feel is the worst. That's a lie. The first betrayal stuns you. It's the second one that makes something in you shift. It was the summer after junior year. I was 17, hair too long, ambition buried beneath exhaustion. The school year had ended, but there was no such thing as vacation in the Mercer household. Not for me. While other kids worked summer jobs or went to lake houses, I spent June and July in academic boot camp. Dad called it summer sharpening. SAT prep in the mornings. Reading lists in the afternoons. Essay writing in the evenings. Idle minds rot, he'd say. You're not wasting potential under my roof. But something about that summer was different. The air in the house was tenser, more clipped. Dad was quieter, almost cautious. At first, I thought it was work stress. Maybe the school board was tightening its leash. Maybe he'd finally caught backlash from parents who'd had enough of his draconian grading. Then, one day in late July, I heard it. It was a Tuesday, 3:15 p.m. The air was thick with that particular suburban summer silence. Distant lawnmowers, cicadas, the buzz of sprinklers ticking away on timers. I had just finished annotating a chapter from the Federalist Papers and was heading to the kitchen for something cold to drink. Dad was in his office, the door half closed. Mom wasn't home. She'd left that morning to visit her sister, a convenient euphemism for escaping the house when his mood turned sour. As I passed his office, I heard a voice I didn't recognize. Female, polite, professional. Mr. Mercer, the Department of Education has requested documentation regarding your grading metrics. It's a standard audit, but we noticed your classroom data raises some red flags. I stopped. My foot hung midair, like the wrong movement might make the entire house tilt. Dad's voice came next, low and irritated. I've been teaching for 30 years. My metrics are my business. I know how to separate effort from entitlement. A pause. Then, the woman again. I understand, sir. But a 94% A average among senior students, when their statewide test scores fall 15% below, does raise questions. We'll need access to your gradebook and lesson plans from the last 3 years. Another pause. Tense. Then, the unmistakable click of the call ending. I didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't smile, not yet. But something sharp and hungry flickered behind my ribs. A crack. A tiny fracture in the marble facade of Charles Mercer. That night, at dinner, he was quiet. Too quiet. He sipped his scotch slower than usual, stared at his plate like it owed him something. Mom asked about the call. I had no idea she even knew about it. He waved it off, told her it was routine, and that some bean-counting bureaucrats were trying to justify their paychecks. I watched him lie so easily, watched her nod so naturally, and I realized something terrifying. This house was built on lies. Not just Dad's, not just his fake morals or hypocritical discipline. All of us. All 3 Mercers were actors in a script none of us wrote. The next day, I skipped summer prep. Told Dad I was feeling sick. He raised an eyebrow but let it slide. He was too distracted by whatever trouble was brewing at work. I waited until he left. Then I went into his office. He never let me in there unsupervised. It wasn't just a workspace. It was his temple. Bookshelves lined with academic journals. A wall of certificates and framed letters from grateful parents. A desk so clean it looked staged. But inside the bottom drawer, chaos. Stacks of manila folders, grade sheets, email printouts, and, jackpot, a flash drive tucked inside a dictionary. A real spy movie move. I didn't hesitate. Plugged it into my laptop and opened the only folder inside. Merit_mod. Inside, multiple spreadsheets titled by school year and semester. Dozens of Word docs labeled amended essays with different timestamps. Even a list of students ranked by influence risk, names of kids with politically connected parents, followed by check marks and inflated scores. He was doing it. He was actively changing grades, modifying student outcomes for personal benefit, reputation, favors, whatever currency mattered in his world. The man who whipped me for a 91 had been rigging his system for years. I felt cold. Not angry. Not righteous. Just cold. Like something inside me had quietly died. The final nail in the coffin. I spent the next 3 weeks copying files, printing backups, creating redundancies. Everything encrypted. Everything cataloged. I watched him from across the dinner table each night. How he mocked the news, made sarcastic jabs at lazy Gen Z kids, praised his own old-school methods. And each time he opened his mouth, I heard that call replaying in my head. This raises red flags. I didn't plan revenge. I prepared it, systematically. Then came senior awards night, a staged circus of spotlights and applause. Dad was presenting the Academic Honor Award, the school's highest achievement. He wore his best suit, blue tie, his signature smirk. When he stepped up to the podium, he launched into one of his inspirational speeches. Excellence isn't a gift. It's a decision, he declared. In my classroom, we earn our future one test at a time. We don't cheat, we don't cut corners, and we never settle for mediocrity. The audience clapped. Parents beamed. He was basking in it. So proud. So fake. I looked around and realized none of them knew. None of them saw what I saw. None of them knew this man broke his own son's skin over a B+, while handing out A's to any rich kid with a family golf club membership. That night, I made the decision. No more waiting. No more collecting. I would burn him down. Not out of anger. Not because he hurt me, but because I finally understood something. There is no justice unless someone brings it. And I had the receipts. I graduated from Willow Ridge High with highest honors, valedictorian, and a handshake from the man I had decided to destroy. He gripped my hand in front of the whole auditorium, smiled that stately smile of his, the same one he'd used to charm parents, administrators, and entire school boards. The cameras flashed. Someone cheered. My name echoed across the gymnasium rafters like an accomplishment. Inside, I felt nothing. Nothing but cold calculus. Proud of you, son, he whispered, lips barely moving. Always knew you'd rise to the top. I squeezed his hand tighter than I should have, just enough to press bone. Thanks, I whispered. Learned from the best. We held that fake moment like actors in a play, the crowd none the wiser. The perfect scene. The perfect mask. But backstage, the knives were already sharpened. After graduation, I turned down Ivy League offers. My guidance counselor nearly cried when I told her I was attending a public university in state. But Elliot, you could go anywhere, she pleaded. Exactly. And that's what made it work. Because nobody expects the son of Charles Mercer, local legend, to slink back into the same state that raised him. Not when Stanford and Yale were waiving full rides. But I had a different education in mind. One built not on prestige, but access. I enrolled at Carver State University, a mid-sized school in Northern Virginia, not too far from where my father had once lectured at an education conference. The university had a joint graduate program with the Virginia Department of Education, a little-known bridge for aspiring policymakers, data analysts, and compliance officers. It was perfect. By 22, I had a degree in education policy and had started my master's in data-driven school accountability. By 23, I had an internship in the Office of Academic Oversight for the Commonwealth. By 24, I had full access to the very systems that could destroy my father's reputation, if used correctly. I didn't rush it. No, rushing is for people fueled by rage. I was driven by strategy. Every good fraudster, I had learned, leaves a trail, a pattern. They grow comfortable, predictable, lazy. My father had spent decades manipulating grades at Willow Ridge High. He never changed student names, too risky. But he did change scores, weights, rubrics. He relied on outdated lesson plans and recycled answer keys. He fudged performance metrics when test scores fell short of school benchmarks. All of that was in the data. I requested access to regional school performance statistics under the guise of a comparative research project, identifying performance gaps across socioeconomic divides. Boring enough to avoid attention. Official enough to grant clearance. And there it was. Willow Ridge High, Charles Mercer's domain. The school's records looked perfect on paper. Too perfect. His students consistently received higher classroom grades than their statewide assessment scores reflected. Anomalies. Repeated patterns of inflated A's, especially in senior-level government and history courses, the very subjects he taught. But that wasn't enough. Not yet. I needed proof of intent. Proof of corruption. I paid a visit to my old high school under the guise of professional research. Told the new principal, Mr. Thacker, that I was a graduate student evaluating curriculum efficacy. He remembered me from my speech. Offered coffee. Let me tour the building. Charles Mercer, he retired last year, Thacker said as we walked the halls. Went out with honors. Whole staff came together for a tribute video. Real legacy. Yeah, I said, smiling with my teeth, but not my eyes. Big shoes to fill. I requested copies of archived lesson plans and grading rubrics. Thacker hesitated at first, but a well-placed reference to the Department of Education's Research Compliance Act did the trick. I walked out with a USB drive full of my father's records from the past 5 years. He hadn't updated a single lesson in at least 3. Worse, he'd reused identical test keys, meaning any student with an older sibling had the answers baked in. That, combined with altered scores on the digital gradebook logs, spelled a damning pattern. He wasn't just lazy. He was fabricating academic outcomes, en masse. And I now had more than data. I had evidence. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, reading his old rubrics, cross-referencing submission dates, and matching test scores to state assessments. Every student whose parent was connected to the school board, top grades, even when their test scores were abysmal. Every kid from low-income neighborhoods, graded harshly, marked as underperformers. It wasn't just academic fraud. It was discrimination, institutionalized, prejudiced, calculated, and it had been hiding behind a cardigan and polished loafers for decades. I compiled a dossier, labeled it Mercer_conflict_report_final. PDF, over 70 pages, charts, timelines, emails, annotated lesson plans, whistleblower-style formatting, professional, devastating. Then I made 3 copies. One to the Virginia Board of Education, one to the regional school district, one anonymously submitted to the state's Office of Educational Ethics. No return address, no fingerprints, just truth, sterilized and wrapped in precision. 2 weeks later, the first tremor hit. I received a call from an old friend still teaching at Willow Ridge. Hey, Elliot, your dad's name is popping up in meetings. Something's going down. You know anything about it? I played dumb. No idea. Thought he was retired? Yeah, but apparently there's some review into his past grading. A whistleblower file got sent around. It's bad. I thanked him and hung up. Then I poured myself a drink. Sat on the balcony. Watched the traffic go by like ants below a boot I was slowly lowering. Within a month, the board had launched a full internal audit. Parents were contacted. Former students were interviewed. Grade inconsistencies were reviewed. By the second month, it had made the news. Former Willow Ridge teacher under investigation for grade fraud. Community icon accused of academic misconduct. State audit uncovers concerning patterns in retired educators' records. They never said his name directly at first, but local news knew who they were talking about. Everyone in our town did. And him? He was blindsided. He had no idea where it came from. No clue that the call was coming from inside the house. I didn't contact him. Didn't gloat. Didn't break the silence. That was the best part. Letting him sit in it. Alone. The man who taught me that mistakes deserved pain now lived in the shadow of the very shame he forced on others. And I wasn't finished yet. I didn't hear from him for a while. No calls. No emails. Not even a knock at my door. But I kept the Google alert on his name, and when the fire spread far enough, it started pinging daily. The first formal headline came 2 months after I submitted the report. State Ethics Committee launches investigation into Charles Mercer. A week later, former educator allegedly altered student grades to benefit influential families. Then, audit reveals widespread violations in classroom practices. Dozens of transcripts may be invalidated. The only thing louder than the news was the silence coming from the Mercer household, which meant one thing. He knew. I got the call in early October. Unknown number. I answered without thinking. Elliot. His voice was rough. Not sick, stripped. Like someone had sandpapered his lungs and dumped ash in the gaps. Dad. I said it with all the warmth of a receptionist. I need to see you. No demands. No instructions. Just 4 flat words. I didn't say yes. Didn't say no. I just gave him an address. Not mine, but a quiet public cafe in the center of Richmond, tucked between a used bookstore and a tax office. Neutral ground. He was already there when I arrived. Same slacks. Same blazer. Tie slightly crooked, something I'd never seen before. His hair was thinner. Paler. Maybe from stress. Maybe just time finally catching up. He stood when I walked in. Didn't reach out. Didn't smile. Just sat back down when I did. I'm assuming you know why I'm here, he said. I watched him. Let the moment breathe. I have some guesses, I said. But go on. This should be good. He flinched at the sarcasm. Just a flicker, but it was there. They're coming after me, he said. The ethics committee. The state board. Local press. Everyone. You don't know what they're accusing me of. I know exactly what they're accusing you of, I said. Then I took a sip of coffee. And for once, they're right. His eyes met mine. And I saw it. That flicker of realization. You? He said, just above a whisper. You did this. I smiled. Me? No. You did this, Charles. You built the fire. I just handed someone the match. He leaned forward, voice tight. You're my son. Why would you? I didn't let him finish. I slammed my cup down hard enough to make the table jump. You beat me over in '91, Dad. The people at the next table turned. I didn't care. You demanded perfection while falsifying the futures of every kid whose last name could buy a golf club membership. You called me weak when I cried and lazy when I bled. You said discipline built men, but all it built was fear. He said nothing. Not because he couldn't, but because he didn't have a script for this conversation. There were no rubrics, no syllabi, no rehearsed lectures. Just me, the son he trained to be perfect, now weaponizing every inch of it against him. I gave 30 years to that school, he said finally, voice quiet. To that community. And you? No, I cut in. You gave 30 years to yourself. To your reputation. You built a throne on the backs of kids who didn't have parents with boardroom pull. You changed their grades to please donors and humiliate those who couldn't fight back. He looked older now. Not tired. Small. Like a man realizing the suit he wore didn't make him invincible. Do you even know what they're threatening? He asked, a hint of desperation leaking in. They want to revoke my pension. Strip my teaching license retroactively. They want me blacklisted. Elliot, that's my entire life. And yet, I said, voice cold, somehow I'm not crying for you. He swallowed. His hands were clenched on the table, knuckles white. Then he tried it. The last card in his deck. The father card. You wouldn't exist without me. Everything you are, the discipline, the strength, the success, it all came from me. I leaned back and laughed. Yeah, I said. You made me. You forged me in a furnace. But here's the part you didn't expect. You made me better than you. His eyes narrowed. You think this is justice? No, I said. This is balance. I stood. By the way, I added, pulling a small manila envelope from my coat. Just in case you think this was all a fluke. I slid it across the table. Inside, a printed list of every falsified grade from the last 10 years. Highlighted. Time-stamped. With annotations. Some of it was already in the ethics committee's hands. But this was personal. A reminder. A mirror. You don't just lose your job, Charles, I said. You lose the illusion that you were ever anything more than a coward in a tie. I walked out without looking back. Didn't wait to see if he opened the envelope. Didn't care. By the end of the month, it was official. His license was revoked. His pension was frozen. His name was stripped from the Educators' Hall of Honor at Willow Ridge. The final blow came when the district sent out letters to parents and alumni, informing them that any academic record touched by Charles Mercer would be reevaluated. They didn't call it what it was. But I did. Erasure. Mom called once. She didn't scream. Didn't accuse. Just said, was it really necessary? I told her no. But it was overdue. She hung up. I haven't heard from her since. Sometimes people ask me if I miss having a father. I tell them the truth. I don't know what that's like. I had a warden, an enforcer, a hypocrite. And now? Now, I have peace. Not the Hollywood kind. Not the tearful reconciliation or cathartic healing. Real peace. Quiet. Heavy. Honest. And earned. They didn't say my name. Not once. Not in the articles. Not in the statements from the Department of Education. Not in the whispers that lingered like smoke across the Willow Ridge community. But they all wondered. Who? Who had the access, the insight, the timing? Who had the precision to dig through 10 years of records, match them with test score discrepancies, pull lesson plan metadata, and wrap it all in a tight, damning bow? Most assumed it was a jealous former colleague. Some whispered it might have been a spurned student. A few even said it was a political move, someone out to punish old-school methods. But no one pointed at me. Not publicly. Not even him. Charles Mercer went down in silence. After that meeting in the cafe, he vanished from the public eye. No interviews. No lawsuits. No defenses. The man who once lectured for an hour without breathing, who stood tall in front of packed auditoriums talking about honor and standards, simply disappeared behind his front door. He kept the house. Somehow. They said he sold his car, cashed in some long-forgotten investments. The pension was frozen, not erased. It'd take years of appeals before a final ruling, and he wasn't going to win. But legally, he wasn't bankrupt. Not yet. Just irrelevant. A man who used to dominate staff meetings was now an invisible ghost walking down his driveway to get the mail at 6 a.m., hoping no neighbors were watching. I went back home once. Not home exactly. Just the street. Willow Ridge Avenue looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe it was. Maybe I'd outgrown it. Or maybe the place just shrank under the weight of exposed truth. The Mercer mailbox was still there, brass plaque dulled by weather and shame. The flag hung limp. The yard had gone uncut, unkempt, uneven. The windows were all closed. Curtains drawn. A fortress in retreat. I didn't knock. Didn't want to. There was nothing left inside I needed to confront. My work was done. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the pull of his gravity. But here's the thing no one tells you. After revenge, there is quiet. And in that quiet, questions creep in. Not regret. Not guilt. Just questions. Who are you now, when the villain is dead but still breathing? What fills the space where fear used to live? I spent the months after his fall avoiding conversations. No interviews. No lectures. No writing gigs. I could have cashed in. People would have loved to hear from the mysterious whistleblower who toppled the legend. But I wasn't interested in applause. I'd had enough performance to last a lifetime. Instead, I worked. I took a position with the Bureau of Educational Compliance. Not flashy, but real. The kind of work that caught problems early, flagged irregularities, protected students whose parents didn't own yachts. It was slow, bureaucratic, but it was the opposite of Charles Mercer. And that was enough. Every now and then, I'd run into someone from the past. Old classmates, teachers, even a few parents. Some talked about him like a tragic hero. He was strict, sure, but he cared. Too bad it ended the way it did. What a shame. Some were less forgiving. Bastard had it coming. You know, my kid said he always thought Mercer was fake. No one said the word abuser. No one said tyrant. The worst they could manage was disappointment. But I knew better. They didn't see the belt. Then, one day in March, I got a letter. Handwritten. No return address. Inside was a single sheet. Thick, expensive stationery. Elliot, I understand now. You were always watching. Always listening. You didn't learn discipline. You learned precision. And now I know the difference. CM. I stared at the paper for a long time. No apology. No regret. Just recognition. Recognition of the blade I became, and who forged it. I didn't keep the letter. I burned it in my sink, and let the ashes wash down like a grate erased. Mom moved out 6 months later. Filed for a quiet divorce. No lawyers. No statements. Just gone. I got a short email from her the day the papers cleared. I should have stopped him. I didn't. I see that now. I hope you're safe. I hope you're free. Mom. I didn't respond. Not because I hated her. Because I didn't know how to talk to someone who watched me burn and called it tradition. Some debts can't be paid in words. And me? I kept moving. I don't believe in healing, not in the way people talk about it. Healing is a fantasy for the privileged. But I believe in rebuilding. Quietly. Systematically. Brick by brick. I mentor new analysts now. Help them spot academic fraud early. Teach them how to see the masks before they're fully formed. I don't tell them about my past. I let the data speak. It always does. Once, a colleague asked me, if your dad hadn't hurt you, would you still have exposed him? I didn't answer. Because that's not the right question. The real question is, if I hadn't exposed him, would I still be his son? And that answer? No. Not ever again. There's a point where silence becomes more powerful than noise. After the articles stopped running, after the school letters were mailed out and the forums cooled down, my father's name became radioactive. Not explosive, just untouchable. No one dared say it too loudly. Not in Willow Ridge. Not in district meetings. Not even in academic circles where tenure used to protect men like him from consequences. It was as if he'd never existed. Or worse, that he had, and everyone preferred to forget it. 6 months after the revocation of his license, the Virginia Board of Education announced sweeping new compliance reforms. They were branded under a sleek title, the Mercer Transparency Mandate. The irony wasn't lost on me. A policy named after the man it buried. A ghost legislating the future of public trust. The mandate forced schools to digitally log all grade changes with timestamps and justification. Submit biannual audits on performance discrepancies between classroom grades and state testing. Provide rotating lesson plan reviews to ensure instructional relevance. Train all staff in ethics accountability, with a renewed focus on power dynamics in the classroom. Some praised it. Others quietly hated the extra oversight. But no one said it was undeserved. Especially not in districts where Charles Mercer's name had once meant standard bearer. Now it meant liability. I watched the dominoes fall one by one. Superintendents resigned. Veteran teachers panicked. Some retired early, citing health reasons or family obligations, but everyone knew what it was. Fear. My father's downfall had sent a message. No one is above the audit. And the system, for once, listened. One day, I got a call from a school administrator in Chicago. A woman named Sandra Dole. She was heading a pilot program in academic integrity and had read through the public files attached to the Mercer case. She asked if I'd be willing to speak at a national education summit. Not as the whistleblower, of course, just as an expert in data compliance and oversight. I didn't say yes, but I didn't hang up either. She followed up with an email the next day. In the signature block, I noticed she had added one line beneath her title. Accountability isn't punishment. It's a promise. I stared at it longer than I should have. Not because it was profound, but because it was foreign. Where I came from, accountability was a threat, a belt, a raised voice. But in her words, it was almost redemptive. I told her I'd think about it. Meanwhile, my father's reputation continued to rot in silence. I found a Reddit thread once, buried deep in an education subforum. Title: Anyone else survive Mercer's AP Gov class at Willow Ridge? The comments were brutal. Guy once gave me a D on a 10-page essay with no explanation. I cried after school every Thursday. That was test day. He told me I wasn't college material. I graduated top of my class at NYU. Then came the stories of manipulation. He changed my friend's grade after her dad made a donation to the school library. My brother got an A for sleeping through half the year. His mom was PTA president. And then, the comment that stopped me. I always thought his son must have had it the worst. If anyone finds him, buy that man a drink. I didn't respond, but I read it again and again, not for validation, not for comfort, just to know someone saw it. A year passed. I got a promotion, moved into a district liaison role, traveling between schools, conducting quiet investigations when needed. I wore a badge that didn't shine. I asked questions that made people nervous. Some principals smiled too much when I visited. Others refused to meet my eyes. A few tried to joke about the Mercer case. Hell of a mess, huh? One guy said in a lounge with old vending machines and flickering fluorescents. Can't believe no one caught it sooner. I stared at him. People did, I said. They just didn't say anything. He went quiet after that. Mom moved to North Carolina. Started working part-time at a retirement home, according to the last update I heard through my cousin. She didn't take anything from the house, just some clothes and a few old pictures. She left behind the wedding album, the diplomas, the family Christmas cards from years when smiles were worn like costumes. I think she knew the house itself was a tomb. Some walls hold too many echoes to repaint. As for my father, last I heard, he was applying to be a substitute teacher for private tutoring firms, the kind that cater to homeschooled students and fly under regulation radars. He used a different name, dropped the Charles, started going by Rick. I almost laughed when I heard that. Rick Mercer, a man trying to shrink himself into obscurity. But no alias could erase his past. Google never forgets. The first 5 search results for Charles Mercer still linked to the audit report, the local news takedown, and the official ethics ruling. His sins are written in digital stone. Permanent ink. I never sent him another message. Never wrote back to his cryptic note. Never visited the house again. But sometimes, late at night, I'd wonder what he sees when he looks in the mirror. Does he still think he was right? Does he believe he was the victim? Does he even recognize the boy he raised? The one who used to stand at the top of the stairs, report card in hand, heart pounding like a war drum? Probably not. But I do. And I see him clearly now, not as a victim, not as a monster, but as a product of a system that rewards performance over principle, fear over fairness, control over care. He thrived in that system, until I tore it down, starting with him. They tore down the old wing of Willow Ridge High last year. I saw it in a newsletter I didn't sign up for. One of those automated alumni bulletins sent out to keep donation checks flowing. Construction begins on new science building, the headline read, complete with renderings and digital mock-ups. Bright windows, open learning spaces. Words like innovation and transparency tossed around like marketing confetti. I clicked through the article, expecting nothing. But at the very bottom, buried under the fundraising totals and faux enthusiastic quotes from the new principal, I found the line. The Charles Mercer Auditorium has been renamed as part of the Campus Modernization Initiative. Its new title will honor the school's first female superintendent. Just like that, his name was gone. No press release. No scandalous deletion. Just erased in a quiet pivot, like a stain finally cleaned after years of pretending it was a shadow. I stared at the screen for a long time. Not smiling. Not frowning. Just existing in the silence that followed an ending. There was a time when I thought revenge would feel like triumph. A rising score. A vindication. Fireworks over ruins. But it didn't. Not really. There was no explosion. No applause. Just a long exhale, like I'd been holding my breath for 18 years and finally remembered how to breathe. I spoke at the summit in Chicago. Eventually, I said yes. Not out of ego. Not for recognition. Just because I knew someone in the room needed to hear it. Not my story. Just the truth behind the story. The system. The numbers. The blind eyes. I stood behind a podium in a crowded conference center and talked about patterns of grade manipulation. About performance bias, administrative cowardice, and the quiet arrogance of unchecked authority. I showed the graphs. The case studies. The anonymous testimonies from students whose futures were bent around a teacher's ego. No one knew the speaker had lived inside that system, that I hadn't just studied the Mercer file, I was born in it. That was my choice. Because Elliot Mercer, the son, had done his job. Now it was Elliot Reed, my legal name since last year, who would finish the work. I changed it quietly. No fanfare. No ceremony. Just signed the papers at the courthouse one foggy morning, answered a few questions, paid the fee. Walked out lighter. Not free. Not new. But lighter. Names carry weight. And his name was no longer mine to carry. I kept one thing from the house. Not the letters. Not the belt. Not the photos or the files. Just a book. A worn copy of Cicero. On duty, its corners folded, pages underlined in red. Inside the front cover was a handwritten quote in his clean, academic script. We must not say every mistake is a foolish one. Marcus Tullius Cicero. I read that line now and then. Not because it comforts me. Because it's the only time he ever admitted, even quietly, even accidentally, that he could be wrong. Even if he didn't believe it. Even if he couldn't say it out loud. I don't talk about him. Not to coworkers. Not to partners. Not to friends. I've become a man of few stories and precise truths. The past doesn't define me. It built me, brick by brutal brick. But it doesn't own me. I drive past schools now with a different eye. I look for signs, not of buildings, but of culture. I pay attention to whether teachers look students in the eye. Whether principals smile or smirk. Whether the doors are open during lunch or locked tight behind rules written for convenience, not care. You can see right if you know what it looks like. And I do. Last fall, I visited a school in rural Tennessee. Tiny place. Fewer than 200 students. One principal, who also taught English Lit on Wednesdays because the district couldn't afford a full-time teacher. Her office was a repurposed supply closet. I asked her why she stayed. She smiled. Real tired. Saves me from having to fix someone else's mess later, she said. I nodded. We shared a quiet moment. Two people who'd spent different lives in the same war. Then she said something I'll never forget. You know, people talk a lot about legacy. But sometimes, surviving is the legacy. She didn't know my story. But somehow, she still understood. I got a letter from a former Willow Ridge student a few months ago. A girl named Jasmine. I remembered her. Quiet. Brilliant. Terrified. She wrote, when Mercer failed me junior year, I thought I was dumb. I stopped applying to colleges. I didn't even take the SAT. Then I read the articles. I cried for 2 days straight. Not because I was angry. Because it wasn't my fault. Thank you for making sure someone finally said it. I didn't write back. There was nothing to say. Because some truths don't need answers. Just acknowledgement. Years ago, I stood in front of a man who called himself my father and asked myself, am I his son? Today, I look in the mirror and ask, am I mine? And the answer isn't simple, but it's honest. I am not him, but I am what he made. And I've made something else with it. Not vengeance. Not legacy. Justice. Quiet. Permanent. Graded in ink no system can erase.